The rain was falling sideways when Evelyn Thorne's rental car finally gave up on life at the exact moment she needed it most. She was already 20 minutes late for the most important job interview of her career, soaked from her previous attempt to flag down help, and now staring at a dashboard full of warning lights that looked like a very expensive Christmas tree. "Perfect," she muttered, banging her forehead against the steering wheel with just enough force to express frustration without actually causing injury. Absolutely perfect. She was stranded on a rural road somewhere outside Millfield, Connecticut, trying to reach the Blackwood Observatory for a position as senior astronomer that could change everything about her stalled academic career. The job posting had been almost too good to be true. State-of-the-art equipment, generous research budget, and complete autonomy to pursue her own projects. The only catch was that Blackwood Observatory was privately funded by a reclusive billionaire who insisted on personally interviewing every candidate. Evelyn pulled out her phone to call for help, but the screen showed no signal bars and a battery level that was hovering dangerously close to zero. She'd been so focused on preparing for the interview that she'd forgotten to charge her phone the night before, and now she was paying for that oversight with interest. She was contemplating whether to abandon the car and walk in the rain when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Through her rain-streaked windshield, she could see a dark pickup truck slowing down as it approached her obviously disabled car. The truck pulled over in front of her, and she watched as someone got out and jogged back toward her car through the rain. The person knocked on her window, and Evelyn rolled it down to find herself looking at a man who appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing a rain jacket and the kind of concerned expression that suggested he was genuinely interested in helping, rather than taking advantage of her situation. "Car trouble?" he asked, raising his voice to be heard over the rain. "Dead car trouble," Evelyn replied. "Everything just stopped working at once." "I'm Marcus. I live about a mile down the road. Can I give you a ride somewhere or call someone for you?" Evelyn hesitated. She'd grown up in cities where accepting rides from strangers was generally inadvisable, but she was also stranded in what appeared to be the middle of nowhere, with a dead car and a dead phone. 30 minutes late for the most important interview of her professional life. "I'm supposed to be at the Blackwood Observatory," she said. "I'm already late for an interview." Marcus's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise, followed by what looked like recognition. "Dr. Evelyn Thorne?" Now it was Evelyn's turn to be surprised. "How did you know that?" "I'm Marcus Blackwood. I was expecting you 30 minutes ago." Evelyn stared at him, feeling her carefully prepared interview strategy crumble into embarrassment and confusion. She'd imagined meeting her potential employer in a professional setting, not while stranded on a country road in a rainstorm with her hair plastered to her head and her interview outfit slowly absorbing rainwater. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry I'm late. My rental car just died and my phone has no signal, and I've been trying to figure out how to get to the observatory without missing the interview entirely." "Well, you found the solution to half your problems," Marcus said with a smile that seemed genuinely amused rather than annoyed by the situation. "Let me help you get your things, and I'll drive you up to the observatory. We can deal with the car situation after we get you dried off and properly introduced." As Marcus helped her transfer her luggage and interview materials from the rental car to his truck, Evelyn tried to reconcile her expectations with reality. She'd researched Marcus Blackwood extensively in preparation for the interview, but most of the information available about him was related to his family's tech fortune and his decision to fund astronomical research rather than pursue traditional business ventures. The photos she'd found showed a serious-looking man in expensive suits at charity galas and business conferences. The person helping her into his truck wore faded jeans, work boots, and a rain jacket that had clearly seen actual outdoor use. He was tall, probably 6'1", with dark hair that was getting increasingly wet despite his jacket's hood, and green eyes that seemed more interested in making sure she was comfortable than in maintaining professional formality. "I feel like I should apologize for the circumstances," Evelyn said as Marcus started the truck and began driving up a winding road that led into the hills. "This is not exactly the professional first impression I was hoping to make." "Are you kidding? This is the most interesting start to an interview I've ever had. Usually people just show up at the scheduled time and sit in the conference room looking nervous." "I am nervous. I'm just also wet and stranded and feeling like I've already ruined my chances of getting the job." Marcus glanced at her as he navigated a particularly sharp curve. "Dr. Thorne, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you want this position? And please don't give me the answer you prepared for the interview. I've read your CV, your published papers, your research proposals. I know you're qualified. What I want to know is why you want to work at a private observatory in rural Connecticut, instead of pursuing positions at major universities or government research facilities." Evelyn considered the question while she watched the landscape change from rural farmland to forested hills. She'd prepared several professional answers about research opportunities and cutting-edge equipment, but something about Marcus's directness and the surreal circumstances of their meeting made her want to respond with equal honesty. "Because I'm tired of politics determining what research gets funded," she said finally. "I'm tired of writing grant applications that focus more on buzzwords than actual scientific value. I'm tired of working in environments where publishing papers is more important than making discoveries." "What kind of discoveries do you want to make?" "I want to understand how planetary systems form around different types of stars. I want to identify potentially habitable exoplanets and study the conditions that might support life. I want to push the boundaries of what we know about the universe instead of just confirming what we already think we know." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Evelyn wondered if she'd been too honest, too passionate, too revealing about her frustrations with academic astronomy. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear," he said finally. The Blackwood Observatory sat on top of a hill that offered panoramic views of the Connecticut countryside, even through the current rainstorm. The main building was a modern structure of glass and steel that somehow managed to blend into the natural landscape, and Evelyn could see the dome of what was obviously a significant telescope rising above the tree line. "This is incredible," she said as Marcus parked in front of the main entrance. "How long has it been operational?" 3 years. I built it after I left the family business and decided to do something meaningful with the money." Marcus turned off the truck and looked at her seriously. "Dr. Thorne, before we go inside, I should probably explain something about how this interview is going to work." "Okay. I don't care about traditional interview questions. I don't care about your 5-year career plan or your thoughts on teamwork and collaboration. What I care about is whether you can do groundbreaking research with the best equipment available, whether you can work independently without constant supervision, and whether you'll be happy here long term." "How do you plan to determine all that?" "By showing you the observatory and seeing how you respond to it. By discussing your research ideas and seeing whether they align with what we can accomplish here. By being honest about what this job actually involves and letting you decide if it's what you want." Marcus led her through the main building, which contained offices, a conference room, a library filled with astronomical texts and journals, and living quarters for researchers who needed to stay overnight for observations. Everything was state-of-the-art, but also comfortable, designed for people who would be spending long hours working on complex problems. "How many people work here?" Evelyn asked as they climbed the stairs toward the telescope level. "Currently, just 3. Myself, Dr. Sarah Kim, who studies stellar formation, and Dr. James Wright, who focuses on galaxy evolution. We're small by design. I wanted to create an environment where brilliant people could pursue their research without dealing with bureaucracy or politics." "And you do research yourself?" "I do. My background is actually in engineering and computer science, but I've been teaching myself astronomy for the past 5 years. I focus mostly on developing new observation techniques and data analysis methods." They reached the telescope level, and Evelyn felt her breath catch. The main telescope was a reflecting telescope with a 3.5-meter mirror, surrounded by computer systems and analysis equipment that represented the cutting edge of astronomical technology. Through the dome's opening, despite the rain, she could see that the location offered minimal light pollution and clear sightlines in all directions. "This is extraordinary," she said, moving closer to examine the telescope's specifications. "The mirror quality, the tracking system, the spectral analysis capabilities. This is better equipped than most university observatories." That was the goal. I wanted to create a facility where researchers could focus on science instead of fighting for equipment time or dealing with outdated technology. Marcus showed her the control room, where multiple screens displayed current atmospheric conditions, telescope positioning data, and the queue of observations planned for clear nights. He explained the observatory's focus on long-term projects that required consistent access to high-quality equipment, the kind of research that was difficult to accomplish at facilities with shared resources and competing priorities. "What kind of research are you most interested in pursuing?" Marcus asked as they settled in his office, which had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley below. Evelyn described her current project studying the formation of rocky planets around red dwarf stars, her theories about the conditions necessary for habitability, and her ideas for new observation techniques that could identify atmospheric signatures of potentially life-supporting worlds. "The problem with most exoplanet research," she explained, "is that we're limited by the sensitivity of our instruments and the amount of observation time we can secure. My current projects are progressing slowly because I can only get telescope time for a few nights per month, and I'm working with equipment that was designed for different purposes." "What could you accomplish with unlimited access to a telescope designed specifically for exoplanet observation?" Evelyn felt her excitement building as she considered the possibilities. I could complete systematic surveys of nearby star systems. I could collect enough data to actually test theories about planetary formation instead of just proposing them. I could potentially identify dozens of candidate planets for follow-up study by space-based telescopes. How long would that take? With dedicated access to proper equipment? Maybe 3 to 5 years for a comprehensive survey of nearby systems. Less time if I could collaborate with other researchers who could handle different aspects of the data analysis. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same focused attention she'd noticed during their drive from her stranded car. Dr. Thorne, I'm prepared to offer you the position. Evelyn stared at him. Just like that? Just like that. Your research aligns perfectly with what we're trying to accomplish here. Your approach to problem solving is exactly what we need, and your passion for the work is obvious. Don't you want to check my references, discuss salary and benefits, ask me about my weaknesses and career goals? I've already checked your references. Everyone I spoke with said you're brilliant, dedicated, and frustrated by the limitations of traditional academic positions. Salary and benefits are outlined in the packet I'll give you before you leave. As for weaknesses and career goals, I'm more interested in giving you the resources to pursue groundbreaking research than in evaluating your performance in hypothetical scenarios. Evelyn felt a surge of excitement followed immediately by professional caution. Mr. Blackwood, this seems almost too good to be true. Complete research autonomy, state-of-the-art equipment, generous funding. What's the catch? The catch is that you'll be working in relative isolation with a small team. The catch is that your research will be funded by a private foundation rather than government grants, which some people in academia view as less prestigious. The catch is that you'll be working for someone who has strong opinions about how research should be conducted and who expects results. What kind of results? Publishable discoveries, contributions to scientific knowledge that matter, research that pushes boundaries instead of just filling gaps in existing literature. That's what I want to do anyway. Then there's no catch. Marcus offered to drive Evelyn back to town so she could arrange for a replacement rental car and find accommodations for the night while she considered his offer. As they drove down the winding road away from the observatory, Evelyn found herself looking back at the facility with something approaching longing. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they reached the main road. "Of course. Why did you decide to fund astronomical research instead of something more traditional like medical research or education?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, navigating around her abandoned rental car, which looked even more pathetic in the fading daylight. "When I was 12, my father took me to a conference where he was giving a presentation about the family business. I was bored, so I wandered off and ended up in a lecture about the search for exoplanets. The speaker was talking about the possibility of finding other worlds that could support life, and I became completely fascinated. What happened to that interest? My father convinced me that business was more practical, more likely to provide financial security and social status. I spent 15 years building software and managing investments, making money but never feeling like the work mattered. What changed? My father died 3 years ago. Suddenly I had more money than I could ever spend and the freedom to choose what to do with my life. I remembered that lecture about exoplanets and realized I wanted to contribute to something larger than quarterly profit margins." Evelyn understood that journey from practical choices to meaningful work. Her own path through graduate school and postdoctoral positions had been marked by similar compromises between financial necessity and scientific passion. "Do you regret the years you spent in business?" "Not entirely. Those years taught me how to manage resources efficiently and evaluate potential outcomes realistically, skills that turn out to be useful for running a research facility." They reached the small town of Millfield, where Marcus helped her arrange for a tow truck to retrieve her rental car and booked her a room at a bed and breakfast that was apparently the only accommodation option within 20 miles of the observatory. "Take your time deciding," Marcus said as he walked her to the front door of the Victorian house that had been converted into guest lodging. "This is a significant career decision, and you should be certain it's what you want." "How long do I have?" "As long as you need. The position will be here when you're ready for it." "Thank you. For the interview, for the rescue, for the opportunity. Today didn't go at all like I expected, but it might have been exactly what I needed." That evening, Evelyn sat in her room at the bed and breakfast, reviewing the materials Marcus had given her about the position while trying to process everything that had happened since her car died that morning. The salary was indeed generous, the benefits were comprehensive, and the research opportunities were everything she'd hoped to find when she'd started looking for alternatives to traditional academic positions. But more than the professional opportunity, she found herself thinking about Marcus Blackwood himself. He was unlike any potential employer she'd ever encountered direct, without being intimidating, passionate about research without being pretentious, successful without being arrogant. The way he'd handled her car breakdown and managed the unconventional interview suggested someone who was comfortable adapting to unexpected situations and more interested in substance than protocol. She called her sister Rebecca, who was finishing her own PhD in literature and would understand the complexities of academic career decisions. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Rebecca said after Evelyn had explained the day's events. "You got stranded in a rainstorm, were rescued by the billionaire who was supposed to interview you, and he offered you your dream job after showing you around his private observatory?" "That's an accurate summary, yes. And you're calling me because you're wondering if this is too good to be true or because you're attracted to your potential boss?" "I'm calling because I want to make sure I'm thinking about this decision rationally." "Are you attracted to him?" Evelyn considered lying, but Rebecca had always been able to see through her attempts at deception. "He's interesting, intelligent, passionate about his work, unexpectedly kind. But that's not relevant to the job decision." "It's not irrelevant either. You'd be working closely with him in a small team environment. Personal compatibility matters." "Personal compatibility, yes. Personal attraction is a complication I don't need." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to rebuild my career, not complicate it with workplace romance. Because he's my potential boss and that creates inherent power imbalances. Because I don't know anything about his personal life or relationship status." "Those are all reasonable concerns, but Evie, when's the last time you were excited about anything besides work?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. When was the last time she'd been excited about anything besides work? She'd spent the past 5 years so focused on academic survival that she'd barely maintained friendships, let alone pursued romantic relationships. That's not the point. Maybe it should be the point. Maybe this job opportunity came with unexpected benefits you should consider instead of automatically rejecting. "I can't make career decisions based on personal attraction to someone I've known for less than 12 hours. "You're right. But you can make career decisions based on all the factors that matter to you, including the possibility of working with someone who makes you feel excited about more than just your research." After hanging up with Rebecca, Evelyn spent another hour reviewing the research possibilities that would be available to her at Blackwood Observatory. The opportunity was everything she'd hoped to find: intellectual freedom, cutting-edge resources, meaningful work that could advance human understanding of the universe. But Rebecca was right about the personal dimension. There had been something about Marcus Blackwood that had awakened interests she thought were permanently dormant. The way he'd listened to her ideas with genuine engagement, the way he'd handled their unconventional meeting with humor and grace, the way he'd offered her exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been seeking without demanding anything in return, except good work. Maybe it was time to stop viewing personal and professional happiness as mutually exclusive. Maybe it was possible to pursue meaningful work while also remaining open to other kinds of meaningful connections. The next morning, Evelyn called Marcus to accept the position. "I'd like to start as soon as possible," she said. "How long do you need to arrange the transition?" "How does next Monday sound? That would give you the weekend to handle any logistical details and get settled in the area." "Perfect. And Mr. Blackwood, thank you. This opportunity means more to me than you probably realize." "Dr. Thorne, it's Marcus. We're going to be colleagues, and I have a feeling we're going to do some extraordinary work together." 3 weeks later, Evelyn was settled into her new routine at Blackwood Observatory, splitting her time between data analysis, observation planning, and the pure joy of working with equipment that was actually designed for the research she wanted to pursue. She'd found a small apartment in Millfield that was close enough to the observatory for easy commuting, but far enough away to maintain some separation between work and personal life. Working with Marcus turned out to be everything she'd hoped for professionally, and more complicated than she'd expected personally. He was the ideal research collaborator, knowledgeable enough to offer useful input, experienced enough to help solve technical problems, but respectful enough to let her lead her own projects without interference. But he was also funny, thoughtful, and increasingly attractive as she got to know him better. "The atmospheric data from last night's observations looks promising," Marcus said one morning as they reviewed the results from Evelyn's systematic survey of red dwarf systems. "The spectral analysis shows what might be water vapor signatures from 3 different planets." "Might be is the key phrase," Evelyn replied, though she was equally excited about the preliminary results. "We need at least 3 more nights of observation to confirm the signatures and rule out false positives." "When's the next optimal observation window?" "Next week, if the weather cooperates. I've already scheduled the telescope time and prepared the observation protocols." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the data displays with the satisfied expression of someone who was seeing his investment in cutting-edge research pay off with actual discoveries. Dr. Thorne, can I ask you something? You can ask me anything, and it's Evelyn. Evelyn, are you happy here? Not just with the work, but with the environment, the location, the way we operate? Why are you asking? Are you concerned about my performance? I'm asking because I want to make sure we're providing everything you need to do your best work. And because I've noticed that you seem more relaxed than you did during your first week, and I'm hoping that means you're settling in well. Evelyn considered how to answer honestly without revealing too much about her growing personal interest in her boss. I'm happier here than I've been in any previous position. The work is exactly what I hoped it would be. The resources are incredible, and the environment is everything I wanted when I left academia. What about the isolation? Do you miss the energy of a large research university? I miss having more colleagues to discuss ideas with, but I don't miss the politics and competition. And it's not really isolated. I have you and Dr. Kim and Dr. Wright for scientific discussions. Plus, I'm collaborating with researchers at other institutions through the data sharing agreements you've established. What about your personal life? Millfield isn't exactly a cosmopolitan hub of social activity. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm slightly. My personal life has never been particularly cosmopolitan. I'm content with quiet evenings, good books, and the occasional dinner with interesting people. Speaking of dinner with interesting people, Marcus said, his tone carefully casual. Would you like to join me for dinner this weekend? There's a new restaurant in town that's supposed to have excellent food, and I thought it might be nice to celebrate your successful first month here. Evelyn looked at Marcus's face, trying to read whether this was a professional celebration or something more personal. His expression was hopeful but careful, suggesting he was as uncertain about the appropriateness of the invitation as she was. Are you asking me as my employer or as a colleague? She asked. I'm asking as someone who enjoys your company and would like to spend more time with you outside the context of telescopes and data analysis. Then yes, I'd like that very much. Their first dinner together outside the observatory revealed dimensions of Marcus that Evelyn hadn't seen in their professional interactions. Away from telescopes and research discussions, he was more relaxed, more personal, more willing to share stories about his journey from reluctant businessman to passionate astronomy patron. I still feel like I'm making up for lost time, he admitted over dessert that was far more sophisticated than anything Evelyn had expected to find in rural Connecticut. I spent so many years focused on profits and market share that I sometimes feel like I'm trying to cram a lifetime of meaningful work into however many years I have left. You're 34, Evelyn pointed out. You have plenty of time to make meaningful contributions. How do you know how old I am? I researched you extensively before the interview, which feels like a very long time ago even though it was only a month. What else did your research reveal? That you graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in computer science and electrical engineering. That you spent 10 years building software systems for financial analysis. That you're apparently very good at identifying undervalued companies and improving their operational efficiency. That you've never been married as far as public records show, and that you avoid publicity whenever possible. Marcus smiled. Thorough research. What didn't you find out? Why you're really interested in astronomy beyond that childhood memory of an exoplanet lecture. What you do when you're not working on observatory business. Whether you're happy with the life you've built here. Those are good questions. Want to hear the answers? Very much. Marcus told her about his gradual realization that making money wasn't the same as making a difference. About his growing interest in scientific questions that had practical implications for humanity's future. About his decision to use his resources to support research that might answer fundamental questions about life in the universe. I'm interested in astronomy because it's the ultimate long-term thinking, he explained. We're trying to answer questions that will matter to human civilization for centuries. We're building knowledge that could determine whether our species survives and thrives beyond Earth. And personally, are you happy with the life you've built? I'm happier than I've ever been professionally. Personally, Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Personally, I'm still figuring out what happiness looks like outside of work. What do you think it might look like? I think it might involve sharing experiences with someone who understands why the work matters. Someone who can appreciate both the intellectual satisfaction of discovery and the emotional impact of expanding human knowledge. Evelyn felt something shift between them, a movement from professional collegiality toward something more intimate and personal. That sounds like a pretty specific requirement for happiness. I've become more specific about what I want as I've gotten older, less willing to settle for relationships that don't involve genuine connection and shared values. Have you found someone who meets those requirements? Marcus looked directly at her, his expression serious but warm. I'm hoping I might have. The conversation continued for another hour. moving from personal philosophies to shared interests to the kind of hypothetical discussions that revealed compatibility on levels that went far beyond professional collaboration. By the time they left the restaurant, Evelyn felt like she was seeing Marcus clearly for the first time, not just as her employer or research collaborator, but as someone whose intelligence, integrity, and quiet passion made him exactly the kind of person she'd stopped believing she might find. "Evelyn," Marcus said as they reached her car in the restaurant's parking lot, "I want to be direct about something." "Okay. I'm attracted to you. Not just intellectually, though I absolutely respect your work and enjoy our professional collaboration. I'm attracted to you personally, romantically, in ways that probably complicate our working relationship." Evelyn felt her heart speed up with something that was part excitement, part anxiety. "Marcus, I know the timing is complicated. I know workplace relationships can be problematic, especially when there's an employer-employee dynamic involved. But I also know that pretending I don't have feelings for you isn't going to make those feelings disappear." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we be honest about what's happening between us and figure out how to handle it in a way that protects both your career and our working relationship. I'm suggesting we take this slowly and carefully, but that we don't ignore something that might be important just because it's inconvenient." Evelyn looked at Marcus's face, seeing hope and uncertainty, and the kind of genuine affection she'd thought existed only in her imagination. She thought about Rebecca's questions about the last time she'd been excited about anything besides work, about the way Marcus made her feel both professionally respected and personally seen. "I'm attracted to you too," she admitted, "which does complicate things, but maybe not impossibly. What would make it manageable? Clear boundaries between our professional and personal interactions. Agreement that work decisions are based entirely on merit and scientific value. Understanding that if the personal relationship doesn't work out, we still need to be able to collaborate effectively. Those seem like reasonable guidelines. And we take it slowly, figure out whether what we're feeling is based on genuine compatibility or just the excitement of new circumstances." "Agreed." When Marcus kissed her goodnight in the parking lot of a restaurant in rural Connecticut, Evelyn felt like she was finally allowing herself to want something beyond career advancement and scientific achievement. For the first time in years, she was excited about possibilities that had nothing to do with telescopes or research publications. Over the next few months, Evelyn and Marcus developed a relationship that was both carefully professional and increasingly personal. During observatory hours, they maintained clear boundaries. Marcus provided resources and support for her research, but didn't interfere with her scientific decisions or show personal favoritism. After hours, they explored their growing connection through dinners, weekend trips to nearby cities, and long conversations about everything from scientific philosophy to personal dreams. "Your spectroscopic analysis of the HD 4307 system is remarkable," Dr. Sarah Kim commented one afternoon as she reviewed Evelyn's latest research results. "You've identified atmospheric signatures that could indicate not just water vapor, but potentially oxygen and methane as well." "The data is still preliminary," Evelyn replied, though she was equally excited about the implications of her findings. "I need more observation time to confirm the signatures and rule out instrumental artifacts." "How much more time?" "Maybe 6 months of regular observations if weather conditions cooperate, plus collaboration with space-based telescopes for confirmation of the most promising candidates." "That's the kind of discovery that makes careers," Dr. Kim observed. "Have you discussed publication strategy with Marcus?" "Not yet. I want to be completely certain of the results before we start talking about publication timelines." "That's wise. But Evelyn, this could be huge. If you've identified multiple potentially habitable exoplanets in nearby systems, that's the kind of discovery that changes how we think about life in the universe." That evening, Evelyn shared her research excitement with Marcus over dinner at his house, a restored farmhouse that was as thoughtfully designed as the observatory itself. "Sarah thinks I might have identified multiple potentially habitable worlds," she said, trying to contain her excitement enough to eat the excellent pasta Marcus had prepared. "If the confirmatory observations support the preliminary data, this could be one of the most significant exoplanet discoveries in recent years." "How do you feel about that possibility?" Marcus asked. "Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. This is exactly the kind of discovery I've been hoping to make my entire career, but it's also the kind of result that attracts enormous attention and scrutiny." "Are you ready for attention and scrutiny?" "I think so. I've been preparing for this kind of moment since graduate school. But it's different when it's actually happening instead of just being a theoretical future possibility." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Whatever happens with the research, whatever level of attention or recognition it brings, you've earned it through brilliant work and careful analysis. Don't let fear of success prevent you from celebrating what you've accomplished. What if the confirmatory observations don't support the preliminary results? What if I've made an error in analysis or interpretation? Then you'll learn something important about the limitations of current observation techniques, and you'll use that knowledge to design better studies. That's how science works. When did you become so wise about scientific careers? When I started caring about a scientist whose success matters to me more than any business deal I ever negotiated. 6 months later, Evelyn's discovery of 3 potentially habitable exoplanets in nearby star systems was published simultaneously in Nature and Astrophysical Journal letters, accompanied by confirmatory observations from space-based telescopes and follow-up studies by research teams around the world. The discovery made international news and established Evelyn as one of the leading exoplanet researchers of her generation. Dr. Thorne, how does it feel to have made one of the most significant astronomical discoveries of the decade? Asked the reporter from Scientific American, who was interviewing her for a feature story about the Blackwood Observatory's research program. It feels like the beginning rather than the culmination, Evelyn replied. These discoveries raise as many questions as they answer about the prevalence of potentially habitable worlds and the conditions that support life. What's next for your research? We're planning detailed atmospheric analysis of the candidate planets, collaboration with upcoming space missions that can provide higher resolution observations, and expanded surveys of nearby star systems using the techniques we've developed here. What role has the Blackwood Observatory played in enabling this research? Evelyn looked around the conference room where the interview was taking place, seeing through the windows the telescope dome where she'd spent countless nights collecting the data that had led to her discovery. The observatory has provided exactly what I needed to pursue long-term, systematic research without the constraints that limit most astronomical studies. Having dedicated access to state-of-the-art equipment, the freedom to follow interesting results wherever they lead, and the support to take risks on ambitious projects. That's what made this discovery possible. After the reporter left, Evelyn found Marcus in his office reviewing the latest batch of research proposals from scientists who wanted to collaborate with Blackwood Observatory researchers. How did the interview go? He asked. Well, I think. She seemed genuinely interested in the science rather than just looking for sensational quotes. Are you ready for the attention this discovery is going to bring? As ready as anyone can be for something like this. Speaking requests, collaboration offers, job inquiries from universities I never thought would be interested in my work. Job inquiries? Evelyn settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk, noting the careful neutrality in his voice. Several universities have reached out about faculty positions. Research institutes have inquired about directing new exoplanet programs. NASA has mentioned the possibility of involving me in mission planning for future telescope projects. Those sound like incredible opportunities. They are, but they're also opportunities that would take me away from here, away from the work we're building together, away from... She paused, realizing she was about to reveal more about her personal priorities than she'd intended. Away from what? Away from you, away from us. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the same careful attention he brought to complex research problems. Evelyn, I want your career to flourish in whatever way makes you happiest. If that means accepting a position at Harvard or MIT or leading a research program at NASA, I'll support that decision completely. What if what makes me happiest is staying here, continuing the work we've started, building on these discoveries, expanding the observatory's research program? Then we'll figure out how to make that sustainable long-term. How to provide you with the resources and recognition you deserve while keeping you here doing the work you love. And personally, how do we make our relationship sustainable if I'm receiving job offers from institutions that could advance my career in ways that staying here might not? Marcus stood up and moved to stand beside her chair. Personally, I think we've already proven that we can build something together that's worth choosing over other opportunities. Professional success doesn't have to come at the expense of personal happiness. Are you sure about that? Because accepting some of these opportunities could establish me as a leading voice in exoplanet research, could open doors that might not be available if I stay in a private research position. And staying here could allow you to continue making groundbreaking discoveries without dealing with academic politics or competing for resources. The question is what you want your career to look like, not what other people think it should look like. Evelyn stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the telescope dome where she'd spent so many productive nights over the past year. I know what I want my career to look like. I want to keep doing exactly what I'm doing here, pushing the boundaries of exoplanet research, collaborating with brilliant colleagues, having the freedom to pursue ambitious projects that might not get funded through traditional channels. And personally, what do you want your life to look like? I want to build something lasting with someone who understands why my work matters. I want to wake up every morning excited about the research I'm going to do and the person I'm going to share it with. Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, you know. You can have both an extraordinary career and an extraordinary personal life. I'm starting to believe that might be true. What would convince you completely? Evelyn turned to face him, seeing in his expression the same mixture of hope and certainty she felt in her own heart. A proposal that addresses both my professional goals and my personal dreams. What kind of proposal? The kind that involves expanding the observatory's research program to include a dedicated exoplanet research center with multiple telescopes, international collaborations, and funding for postdoctoral researchers who want to pursue cutting-edge projects. That's an excellent professional proposal. What about the personal component? The personal component involves marrying my research collaborator and building a life together that supports both our work and our relationship. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face from serious researcher to delighted partner. Are you proposing to me, Dr. Thorne? I'm suggesting a long-term collaboration that extends beyond professional boundaries, Mr. Blackwood. I accept your proposal on all counts. When Marcus kissed her in his office overlooking the valley where they'd both found exactly what they'd been looking for, Evelyn felt like she was finally understanding what it meant to reach for the stars without losing sight of what mattered most here on Earth. 2 years later, the Blackwood Observatory had grown into a world-renowned exoplanet research center, with 3 additional telescopes, 12 resident researchers, and collaborative agreements with institutions around the globe. Evelyn had been invited to speak at conferences on every continent, had published papers that were reshaping how astronomers approached the search for habitable worlds, and had been elected to the National Academy of Sciences. But the achievement she was most proud of was the life she'd built with Marcus, who had proven to be not just an ideal research collaborator, but the perfect partner for someone whose work required both intellectual passion and emotional support. The latest observations from the James Webb Space Telescope confirm your atmospheric analysis, Marcus said one morning, as they reviewed data from their ongoing study of potentially habitable exoplanets. HD 4307G definitely has water vapor, oxygen, and what appears to be methane in its atmosphere. Which means, Evelyn asked, though she knew the answer, which means you've identified the first exoplanet with clear biosignature evidence, the first world beyond our solar system that might actually support life. Evelyn stared at the data, feeling the magnitude of the discovery settle into her understanding. After years of studying planets that might be habitable, she'd found one that showed evidence of actually being inhabited. This changes everything, she said softly. This confirms everything you've been working toward. The methods you've developed, the systematic approach you've taken, the patience to collect enough data to support definitive conclusions. It's all led to this moment. That evening, they celebrated with dinner at the same restaurant where they'd had their first official date 3 years earlier. Over wine that was probably too expensive for a Tuesday night, but perfect for marking the most significant discovery in the history of exoplanet research. They talked about the implications of finding potential evidence of life beyond Earth. What happens now? Marcus asked. How do you follow up on a discovery that might be the most important astronomical finding in human history?
Carefully, Evelyn replied. With multiple independent confirmations, detailed analysis of every possible alternative explanation, and collaboration with biologists and atmospheric chemists to understand what the data actually means.
And personally, how do you handle being the person who might have discovered evidence of extraterrestrial life? I focus on the science rather than the publicity. I remember that this is one discovery in what I hope will be a long career of important research, and I celebrate having someone to share it with who understands why it matters. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing across the engagement ring he'd given her 6 months earlier, a simple band with a stone that had been cut to reflect light in patterns that resembled the spectral signatures they used to analyze exoplanet atmospheres. To the most brilliant astronomer I know, he said, raising his wine glass. To the person who made it possible for me to do the work I love with someone I love. To reaching for the stars and finding everything we were looking for. As they walked home through the quiet streets of Millfield, past the antique shops and cafes that had become familiar landmarks in their shared life, Evelyn reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd thought success meant finding the perfect research position. She'd discovered that it meant finding the perfect balance between meaningful work and meaningful relationships. She'd thought love meant choosing between personal happiness and professional achievement. She'd learned that the right love supported both dreams simultaneously. Evelyn, Marcus said as they reached the farmhouse they now shared, with its views of the valley and its proximity to the observatory where they both worked. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your rental car hadn't broken down that day? Never, she said without hesitation. I think we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are written in the stars. Literally in our case. Literally and figuratively. That night, as they lay in bed looking through the skylight Marcus had installed so they could see the stars from their bedroom, Evelyn thought about the vast universe above them and the small, perfect world they'd created together below. Tomorrow she would return to her telescopes, continuing the search for other worlds that might harbor life, adding to humanity's understanding of their place in the cosmos. Marcus would continue developing new technologies and supporting research that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. They would work together and separately, pursuing shared goals while maintaining their individual passions. But tonight, there was only the quiet satisfaction of having found exactly what she'd been looking for, even though she hadn't known she was looking for it. There was only the peace of loving someone who saw her clearly and supported her completely, who understood that the search for life in the universe was inseparable from the search for meaning in their own lives. Evelyn Thorne Blackwood fell asleep grateful for broken-down cars that led to perfect opportunities, for the courage to say yes to both professional dreams and personal happiness, and for finding someone who made reaching for the stars feel like coming home. In the observatory dome nearby, their telescopes continued their patient watch over the night sky, collecting photons that had traveled across vast distances to tell stories about distant worlds. And in the farmhouse nestled in the valley below, two people who had learned to balance scientific ambition with human connection slept peacefully, dreaming of discoveries yet to be made, and a love that had already exceeded their wildest hypotheses about what was possible when the right elements came together under perfect conditions. The universe, as it turned out, had its own way of bringing together the people who were meant to explore its mysteries side by side.